Hey guys, it's Alexandra from iloveknots.com. Today I'm going to be showing you how to knit in the back loop. This is an easy knitting pattern that uses a slightly modified knit stitch. So this is actually the garter stitch, worked exactly the same on front and back. But when we work the knit stitch, we are working into the back loop, which twists the stitches and creates this fabric. My knitting skills are pretty basic. I am much more of a crocheter, but every once in a while I'll pull out my knitting needles and I'll work on a project. I think this stitch is even easier to work than the traditional knit stitch, the traditional garter stitch, because I find it so much easier to control my fabric. The garter pattern just means you're knitting on both sides, so each time you turn you're knitting across. That creates the garter stitch. When I work this traditional garter stitch, I find my fabric doesn't come together as nicely. It's a little bit wonky looking, it's a little bit loose in some places. Working this knit in the back loop, I find I can control my stitches so much better, and my fabric actually turns out nice. For this tutorial, I'm using H8 5mm knitting needles. I'm also using WeCrochet Swish worsted weight yarn. This is one of my favorite yarns. It is 100% merino wool, but it is soft, it is not itchy, it is so easy to work with, and whatever you create with it is just so cozy. It almost feels like it's hugging you. It's wonderful. You could do this stitch pattern with any yarn and the respective size knitting needles. Let's get started. We're going to work with a long tail cast on. There are different ways you can cast on. This is my preferred method. The long tail cast on counts as the first row, so if you choose a different method, it may or may not have the same height. So for the long tail cast on, you want to leave a long tail first because that's what you're going to use to create your first row, to do your cast on. And if you run out of stitches here, then you have to take it out and leave a longer tail. I'm only doing a small sample, so I'm not going to leave my tail too long. But then I'm going to create my slip knot. So I have the tail here on the right. I have the yarn over my fingers, and then the working yarn continues past that. I'm going to take the yarn, wrap it around my index finger 2 times, and then I'm going to hold the tension with my thumb and my middle finger. Take the loop that's on the left, pull it up over the other one, but not off my finger. Take the other loop that's on the left now, pull it up over the other one and off my finger. Then I'll take my knitting needle and I'll insert it into the loop where my finger is at. Hold the working yarn in your right hand, the tail end on your left, and pull on the tail end. It'll tighten this knot up to normal tension. In the Bernat blanket yarn, it doesn't work as smoothly, and you might actually need to hold the slip knot as you're pulling. Here on the top we have the working yarn from the ball. Here on the bottom we have the tail end. On the right side, I'm going to hold that loop with my index finger so that that loop and the other loops that I put on it don't fall off the needle. I knit continentally, that is the style of knitting. That means I hold my yarn in my left hand and in almost the same way that I hold it when I'm crocheting. I am a crocheter first, so this was the easiest way for me to transition over. I also hold my yarn a little bit differently, and that is so my left hand doesn't cramp up. That is how I'm going to put it on my left hand. So if you already know how to knit, or you crochet, hold the yarn in your left hand like you normally do. But I'm going to take my ring finger and I'm going to slide it underneath that top strand. So that it is under my pinky, over my ring finger, under my middle finger. Then I'm going to take those 3 fingers and I'm going to fold them under. Now my index finger and thumb are in an L shape. I'm going to pinch them together and put them underneath the 2 strands. They're still in that L shape. They're just now underneath those 2 strands. I'm going to take my pinky, ring finger, and middle finger and I'm going to reach down and I'm going to pick up that yarn strand from the bottom that is now underneath my palm. So looking at it, it's right here still. I want to put that into those fingers. Still keeping this L shape. So quick recap. I have the yarn strand here from the top. Index finger and thumb are underneath the 2 strands coming from the needle in an L shape. And then the bottom strand is also captured underneath my pinky and my ring finger. Making sure I'm holding tension here, I'm going to flip my left hand so that it is mirrored. I'm going to bring my needle to my palm, bring it into that hole where my thumb is, picking up that bottom strand. Then I'm going to rotate my left hand counterclockwise, bring that needle to the right around that top strand, picking it up, rotate my left hand clockwise, bring the needle down through the same hole where my thumb is, and now on my needle you're going to notice there are 2 stitches. Hold those 2 stitches, release my thumb so the loop falls off. I'm going to replace my thumb underneath the strand that's right underneath the stitches on my needle. And then I'm going to pull down with my thumb. And as I do that, I'm going to rotate my hand back to the L position. And by pulling downward on that strand, you're tightening up the top loop. Now I'm in the L position again. I'm going to flip my left hand so it's mirrored. Bring the needle towards my palm, up through the hole where my thumb is, picking up the bottom strand. Rotate my left hand counterclockwise. Bring the needle to the right around that top strand, picking it up. Rotate my left hand clockwise. Bring the needle down through the hole where my thumb is. I now have 3 stitches on my needle. Release my thumb. Loop falls off. Replace my thumb under the strand underneath my stitches. And in the same motion, return my left hand to the L shape and pull downward with my thumb. You might run out of finger room. Just reposition your hand and continue until the stitch on the top is the same height as all the rest. You don't want it too tight, you're going to be working into that, but you want it to be all consistent. Hold my stitches on my right hand needle, flip my left hand so it's mirrored. If at any point here you feel like it's too tight, just release some yarn from your fingers so you have enough to work with. Take my needle towards my palm, up through the hole where my thumb is, picking up that bottom strand. Rotate my hand counterclockwise. Bring the needle around the top strand, picking it up. Rotate my hand clockwise. Bring the needle down through the hole where my thumb is. I now have 4 stitches on my needle. Release my thumb, loop falls off. replace my thumb under the bottom strand where my stitches are, return to L position while pulling downward with my thumb so that the loop that's on my hook tightens to normal tension. And that's how we do the long tail knitted cast on. I'm just working a small sample here to show you how to do the stitches, so I'm just going to put on a couple more stitches and then we'll start working into the row. Alright, I worked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stitches. That's what I'm going to have for my sample today. We're going to work all of our stitches onto our right hand needle, and then when our right hand needle fills up, like right now it's filled up, we take that right hand needle, we flip it so it's mirrored, and we hold it in our left hand. So the tail end is down here on the bottom, the working yarn is still coming from the ball over here on the right side. I'm going to put the yarn back into my left hand, holding it very similarly to how I just was, and to how I hold my yarn when I'm crocheting. And that is, I keep it just the same under my pinky, over my ring finger, under my middle finger. I do this so that my hand doesn't cramp up. That's how I hold my yarn. And here I am in the same position with the yarn over my index finger. If you were holding it the traditional way, the yarn would be here in your fingers, and you would still be with the yarn over your index finger. So whichever way you hold your yarn, it's fine. The working yarn is coming around the back side of the needle, so just keep that in mind. You don't want it around the front. My middle finger and my ring finger are holding the back side of the needle, and my thumb is holding the front. And if you're using Bernat blanket yarn and you have several stitches on here, these fingers might be right on top of the stitches, and that's perfectly fine. Now I'll pick up the needle that doesn't have any stitches on it in my right hand. The easiest way that I find to insert my needle is to go through the bottom center of the stitch. That's where there's the most slack, and I'm going to rotate my left hand needle so it's easier for me to find. Right hand needle, insert it right in the center, and your right hand needle will come out in between the left hand needle and the stitch. Then you're going to wrap the right hand needle, always to the right, around that strand. I'm holding back the stitches on my needle so I don't get them caught. I'm going to bring the tip of my right hand needle downward, sandwiching the working yarn strand in between my needles, and then I'm going to continue downward, pulling a loop up on my right hand needle. And now I've just made a stitch there, and I no longer need the stitch that's on my left hand needle, so I'm scooting my stitches forward to give me the slack I need so that I can pull that off the tip. We want to make sure each time we slide our left stitches forward, if they're on the tip of the needle, that is a smaller part, so our stitches will be smaller if we're knitting off that. We want to make sure we slide our stitches back onto the body of the knitting needle where it's all the same size. It starts to taper off as you get closer to this point here. So just make sure you slide them back onto the body and then work your next stitch. So now we're in the perfect position here to insert our needle into the bottom center of the next stitch. And as we do that, we just want to make sure that we're coming out on the back side of our fabric. Looking at your needle here, here's the front side, here's the back side, this is the back loop that we're working in. Wrap the needle around the working yarn, hold back the stitches on the left needle so you don't get them caught. Bring the right hand needle downward, capturing the working yarn in between both needles. Here you can see both of my needles are touching. I'm going to continue downward with that right hand needle, picking up a loop on it. So now I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle. I'll hold those stitches so they don't fall off, scoot my left hand stitches forward enough so that I can pull off the stitch I just worked into. I don't need that one anymore. Holding the right hand needle stitches, I'm going to pull the left hand stitches back onto the body of the needle. Insert my right hand needle into the bottom center of the next stitch on the left hand needle, coming out on the back side. And I'm also pushing that up to the body of this right hand needle. Bring the right hand needle around the working yarn. Pull the stitches back on the left side a little, and in one motion, bring the right hand needle downward, pulling up a loop on my right hand needle. Now I have 3 stitches on that right hand needle. Move the stitches on the left hand needle forward enough so I can pull off that stitch. Move them back onto the body. Hold the stitches on the right hand needle with my index finger. Insert into the bottom center of the next stitch. Wrap the needle around the working yarn. Pull those stitches back a little. Right hand needle downward so the point touches the other needle. Capturing the working yarn in between, continue downward, pulling up a loop on your right hand needle. Now I have 4 stitches on my right hand needle. Hold on to those, move the stitches up on the left hand needle, and pull off the stitch I just worked into. I'll work a couple more here. Holding on to the loops on my right hand needle, and I'm pulling off the last stitch from my left hand needle. It's usually not the same consistency, and that's because the strand is still loose, but you can hold onto your fabric and just pull on it and it'll tighten up a little bit, and it'll get better when you work the next row into it. But here we have our long tail knitted cast off and 1 row of this knit in the back loop stitch. So we have 2 rows done. Now that we've put all of our stitches onto our right hand needle, we're going to flip it so it's mirrored and put it in our left hand. Take our other needle that doesn't have any stitches and put it in our right hand. Pick up the yarn in our left hand, and now we're ready to work our next row. Each row is worked exactly the same as that previous one. Take the right hand needle, insert it into the bottom center of the next stitch. Wrap the right hand needle around the working yarn. Hold back the stitches on the left side. Bring the right hand needle downward so the tip touches the other needle. You have the working yarn in between the needles. Continue downward with the right hand needle, picking up a loop on your right hand needle. Now you'll move those stitches on the left hand needle over, enough to give you slack to pull off that stitch you just worked into. Then move the stitches back onto the left hand needle and continue working down the line, exactly the same as we did previously. Here I have another row finished. This is now 3 rows. You're going to continue in that same manner. You'll take this right hand needle now, you'll flip it so it's mirrored, put it in your left hand, pick up the needle with no stitches in your right hand and continue across exactly the same. The more rows you work, the easier it will get. I'm going to work a couple more rows off camera so I can show you how to count this, and then we're going to bind off. Alright, I'm going to show you how to count your rows. You're going to see 2 different types of rows when you're looking at this fabric. You see this line that looks like a ridge, and then in between that and the next ridge you see these V-shaped stitches. Each one of those is a row. The ridge is a row, that V-shaped stitch line is a row, that ridge is a row, the next line of V-shaped stitches is a row. You can count it that way. There's my long tail knitted cast on, which counts as a row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or you can count it by just counting the ridges. And you would do that on both sides. So here I have 1 ridge, 2 ridge, 3 ridge, 4 ridge. Then I'll flip my work around. Then I have 5 ridges, 6 ridges, 7 ridges, and 8 ridges. Those are the 2 ways you can count this. I do it the first way. If you have stitch markers handy, that is a great tool to put on the side to mark your rows. That way you don't have to go back to the beginning and count again each time I want to see how far I've gotten. I want to show you one more thing because this is something you may need to know, and it's not very easy to figure out on knitting. Let's say I counted my sample. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I have 8 stitches here right now, but let's say I counted and I saw 9 stitches. That would mean I worked an extra stitch somewhere. So I need to take my stitches out and rework it. That way, wherever I added that stitch, I make sure that I take it out. I'm going to slide the stitches in the fabric to the left, pulling it off the needle carefully. Put my needle down. These stitches on the top can fall out at any time, so just be careful. I'm going to take the working yarn and I'm going to gently pull it so that all of the loops come out. And now I have a row that looks exactly the same, it's just one row down. I'm going to flip the fabric so the working yarn is on the left side, and then I would count here to see if this is the row that I messed up on. If I still had 9 loops here, then I would take out another row, because that means I messed up somewhere further down. Then I take my right hand needle and I insert it from the right side directly in the center of each one of those loops all the way across. And now my loops are back on my needle. I can put this needle in my left hand and I can continue to work the knit rows. Now I'm going to show you how to bind off. After you've worked your project as long as you need to, then you will bind off and then you're ready to weave in your ends. We do it in a similar manner to the other rows. So I have my left hand needle ready to go the same as normal, my right hand needle. I'm going to knit the first 2 stitches as normal. Alright, so now I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle. I'm going to take the first stitch on that needle, the one on the right side, and I'm going to bring it up over the other loop and off the needle. The traditional way of binding off, after you've worked those 2 stitches, you insert your left hand needle from the left into that first loop. I do it kind of similar to how I did before. I take the tip from my right hand needle and I bring it down to the other one and I pull that through. So now I just have 1 stitch on my right hand needle. Now we'll knit another stitch. There are 2 loops on our right hand needle. Take the left hand needle, insert it into the first stitch coming from the left side. Then I bring the right hand needle tip downward towards the other needle and pull that other stitch through so it remains on my hook. Here I've split my stitch, so I'm just holding it with my right hand so I can reinsert my needle. And then pull it off. Insert into the next stitch, work the knit stitch as normal. You have 2 loops on your right hand needle. Insert the left hand needle into the first stitch coming from the left side. And then I do the same knit process, right hand needle downward, pulling that other loop through so it remains on the needle. Sometimes I struggle with this. If you also struggle with this and you cannot do it without your loops falling off your needles, that's okay. For a long time I used my fingers, and I'll show you how I do that. So I'm going to knit the next stitch as normal, so I have 2 loops on my right hand needle. Then I would take my left hand needle, make sure the stitches are not going to fall off, and drop it. Then I'm taking the right hand needle, I'm putting the end of it against my body, and I'm using my fingers. So looking at it this way, the top one is the one I want to stay on, the bottom one is the one I want to pull over and off, and I'm going to use my fingers to make that happen. I'll show you that one more time here. Knit the next stitch as normal. I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle. I'm making sure the loops, the stitches on my left hand needle are not going to fall off. I push them down enough. Drop that left hand, oops, they almost slid off. Drop that left hand needle. Put the end of the right hand needle against my body. I want that top loop to stay and that bottom loop to come off. Okay, so if you have to do it this way, do it. It works exactly the same. Whatever way works best for you, that's the way you should do it. Even though I do know how to do this other one, sometimes I still use my fingers because it's easier for me. I especially find it easy to split my stitches using the correct method. By splitting my stitches, I just mean maybe picking up half of a stitch here on my needle. Usually not on my left hand needle, it's usually here on my right hand needle. As I come down, sometimes there on the bottom, I'll split the stitch. Okay, and now our bind off is complete. Here we would fasten off our yarn, pull up on that loop that's on our needle so that we could break it, and then weave in our ends. Guys, thanks so much for watching my video. Find free knitting patterns, crochet patterns, reviews, yarn giveaways, and so much more at iloveknots.com. Please smash that like button and hit subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.